Rejected, throwing away, affected. I don't know what to say. Ejected, cast out to the sea, disconnected. They didn't want me.
Welcome to a brand new episode of Nicksmissal III. I am Patricia, and I am here with Admin James.
I am here to entertain you all.
Today we're going to be discussing about our first live-action Nickelodeon movie that was eventually canceled. We are talking about the Are You Afraid of the Dark movie. This movie was supposed to come out in around 98, and unlike the Ren and Stimpy and the Aura Monsters movie, in which it didn't get very far, there is a script of the Are You Afraid of the Dark movie, but unfortunately it was never released. Because as soon as the creator, DJ McHale, presented his script over to Nickelodeon, they did not like it. They thought it was too scary for kids. In fact, I actually wrote to DJ McHale a couple of months ago about what this movie would have been about. And I'm just going to read to you what he said to me. The Are You Afraid of the Dark TV movie, which I wrote, is called The Tale of the Wicked Gift. It was about the boogeyman luring kids to his clutches. This was a Mr. Sardou story. It was for Paramount/Nickelodeon movies. I'm sure there were a lot of reasons on why it didn't get made, but the real kiss of death was that they thought it was too intense. Seriously. It didn't matter that I had proven time and time again that I can do horror light that kids had loved. The folks at Paramount at the time couldn't get their heads around doing a dramatic yet truly scary movie for kids. They wanted to do a silly scary movie, like the Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein movie, or like Goosebumps. But that's not Are You Afraid of the Dark? So it died. It happens. Most movies that are written don't get made. So yeah. That's what happened, and you can find out more information about this in Slimed, an oral history of Nickelodeon's Golden Age by Matthew Klickstein, where DJ McHale gets into more information about that movie. So interesting concept about this movie, where he wanted to do kind of like a more darker tone of his original episodes of Are You Afraid of the Dark? And it would have featured Mr. Sardou, so that would have been a recurring character, which Sardou has featured in a handful of episodes. It's just a shame that it didn't come out because they wanted to be more, kid-friendly, like Goosebumps, because, as mentioned in the previous episode of Nicksmissal III, Goosebumps was at the height of his popularity.
Yep, it was. I remember reading the books as a kid, and I absolutely adored them. I have seen the recent reboot, by the way.
Oh, you have? I haven't seen that yet. How was it?
Not that good. I mean, it didn't exactly do a good job of bringing it into the modern age.
Yeah, I think I did hear about this movie, the one that stars Jack Black. The only thing I heard about it was that basically it was just satirizing the 90s, and that was it.
Which is not a good way to go about it if you're trying to reintroduce a franchise to a new audience.
Yeah, especially if it's a franchise that involved with scary monsters and spooky stories. I mean, that was what, that's what the original Goosebumps were about. It wasn't about that, this came out in the 90s, we're gonna make fun of the 90s, ha ha ha. It's like, come on, if that were to be the case, then, geez, I don't know, reboot Thundercats, in which it's gonna make fun of the macho-ness of the 80s, but it didn't do that. It was actually smartly told, even though that pretty much everybody who was a fan of the original Thundercats hated it. But I'm getting off topic. This would have came out around 1998, and I did message DJ again about who would have been the cast of the movie, and again, he mentioned that it never really got past the scripting, so there would have been no information about who would have been the boogeyman or who would have been the cast of characters. But he did tell me that the members of the Midnight Society would have been the ones from the revival, not the ones from the original. I guess that's one bit of the nail in the coffin there, because I don't know about you, but around the late 90s, I don't know, the later seasons of Are You Afraid of the Dark didn't get as much buzz as the earlier ones. I guess maybe they either moved on to Goosebumps, or maybe they didn't like the new members of the Midnight Society, which I guess I could understand. I mean, even though that there's less members of the Midnight Society.
it's a similar situation to all that.
How so?
It pretty much suffered the similar backlash to Are You Afraid of the Dark's resuscitation.
Yeah, what it was is that even though that there were only 5 kids from the Midnight Society as opposed to maybe 10 or even 12, they weren't as memorable. I mean, granted, the original members of the Midnight Society weren't memorable in the slightest. They were just all archetypes of generic kids, but we do remember them. I mean, we remember Gary, we remember Tucker, we remember Kiki and Frank, and Marianne, but the other characters from the newer ones, Tucker came back as the leader because Gary was getting too old, but then you had other characters. You had the kid who was a troublemaker, and you had the simple, dumb farm boy. You had the rich girl, and then you had this other generic girl who was supposed to be, all sassy, and that was pretty much it. It just played more into these archetypes that we didn't really care about. Not to mention that the stories of the later seasons of Are You Afraid of the Dark are nowhere near as memorable as the old episodes. People still to this day, they still remember Zeebo the Clown, they still remember the ghastly grinner, they remember the monster that came out of the swimming pool. As cheesy as Are You Afraid of the Dark may look today, for you younger listeners, you have to understand that back in 1991, this was the twilight zone for our generation. This was like the instance in which if we had nothing to do on Saturday night, this was the perfect time to gather around the couch, turn off the lights, watch these incredibly scary stories with these creepy monsters and this spooky atmosphere, gathered with your friends and just being so immersed in it. Nowadays, we just look at it with irony because, the acting is horrible, the effects are fake and they're not even scary anymore, but...
For its time, it actually was.
Yeah, for its time, it was really good with the effects and stuff like that, but nowadays, it's very, very antiquated. But, anyway, what I'm trying to get at is that Are You Afraid of the Dark meant a lot to people back in the day. It was one of the first shows featured on SNCC, and SNCC became such a massive thing to do around Saturday nights. And, with SNCC... there were other shows that were being featured around that time, All That. When it came out in 94, it pretty much kicked out of, it kicked Are You Afraid of the Dark spot, and All That became, the show to watch on SNCC. And then Kenan and Kel, forget it. Those 2 shows pretty much ruled the 90s. No other live-action show could top it. Even Are You Afraid of the Dark, when it tried to come back after its 3-year hiatus, it just never felt the same. And I don't know about you, James, even though it would have been, really scary for kids, I don't know if it would have, generated as much views, because, and maybe it would have for the younger audience, but then they would probably just see this as why am I watching this and not Goosebumps? Because I remember back in the day, you were either a Goosebumps kid or an Are You Afraid of the Dark kid. The story sounded very interesting, and I'm glad that DJ McHale wanted to go in this dark direction, but I don't know if it would have generated as much viewers because, the stories in Are You Afraid of the Dark were not as memorable in the revival era as in, the earlier seasons. The only one that really sticks on the top of my head is The Tale of the Silver Sight. That is one of my all-time favorite episodes of Are You Afraid of the Dark. Top 5 easily. For those who don't know, it was the 3-part TV movie in which it actually involved with the cast members of the Midnight Society trying to follow this mystery involving with, Gary having to find pieces of a record so they can be able to gather clues to find the Silver Sight. So, it was actually a good story, and, maybe more leaning towards mystery as opposed to scares, but I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah, I just think it was just trying too hard to appeal to the new generation, but I feel because times had changed at that point, and I think I know why it didn't work. For the most part, I think that people were kind of moving on from that.
Yeah, it's the same thing that I mentioned about when they tried to release All Real Monsters, the movie in 98, in which, people wanted to move on to other things. This was when, DreamWorks and Pixar were starting to gain popularity, and Disney was kind of in the background. For this one, it would have been a matter of time before Goosebumps would have lost its popularity, and then Animorphs and Harry Potter took over the world for a good couple of years. Even still to this day, Harry Potter's still in our pop culture with, the Universal Studios rides and the Islands of Adventure where they rebuilt...
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
It's actually kind of a miracle that Harry Potter has sustained its popularity when most things from that era, for example, Family Guy, Jackass, what else? Basically, all of those things, they pretty much lost their popularity this decade, whereas Harry Potter is still going strong.
Remember the whole trend of fantasy movies? Like, which one was going to be the best one? Chronicles of Narnia, Harry Potter, or Lord of the Rings? Chronicles of Narnia never finished its movie series. The Lord of the Rings movies, even though that the trilogy is still considered to be one of the best trilogies in the world, eventually overstayed its welcome and became overbloated with the Hobbit movies. But as for Harry Potter, a lot of people can make fun of Harry Potter for what it is, but it's still making a bunch of money. I mean, the Universal rides, the fact that they're going to be doing a Harry Potter play next year, and there's going to be a new movie coming out called Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. That just goes to show you how much of a staying power it still has.
I think it's pretty much, in a sense, like South Park. I mean, people thought that it wasn't going to last, including Trey and Pat. Yeah, today it's still pretty popular, even though I do feel that it's been kind of overshadowed by Rick and Morty.
Yeah, I mean, South Park is still really relevant to a lot of people because the thing about South Park is that they're able to pump out episodes every single week because they're able to do it, as soon as the first episode's over, they're in-house drawing the next episode in Flash, and then they're able to, find out what the latest, news is going on, and they're able to do their episodes really fast. With Rick and Morty, at least they're taking their time on creating these kind of cartoons, and I'm really glad that Rick and Morty caught on because it's kind of like the thing that adult cartoons really needed because, let's be honest, a lot of the adult cartoons back then just, I don't know, I mean, they try to follow in the Seth MacFarlane route in which we're going to make shock humor just for the sake of shocking you. It's like, it was just getting old really quickly.
I find it weird that adult cartoons are still doing that because Family Guy hasn't really been that popular since 2011.
I don't know. Maybe they just kind of lost track of what's popular as opposed to, what can we do that we like, that we think it'll be good to others.
A time where South Park was just seen as nothing more than shocking, and yet, ironically, it's one of the most intelligent adult cartoons out right now.
Yeah, I mean, the thing of it is that South Park has always been really intelligent under the surface. It's just that people didn't really get South Park's humor because it wasn't anything like it. I mean, we've had the Beavis and Buttheads, we've had the Darias, but then South Park came along and it's like, oh, look at that, there's poop jokes, oh, look at that, there's blood and killing. But then, oh, what's this? Is this talk about terrorism? Is this talk about, what's going on during 9/11? Oh, what about, invading people's privacy when you're Britney Spears getting her head blown off? Oh, what's this? This whole thing about, there's a whole bunch of things that I can talk about. But anyway, getting back on track, with, Are You Afraid of the Dark, the movie, I wish I would have seen this movie, because from, the interviews that DJ McHale had about what the movie would have been about, I would have loved to have seen it. But again, similar to what I said about Our Real Monsters, I don't know if this would have generated a lot of people to go watch it, because, as I said before, 98, kids were getting into more of Goosebumps than Are You Afraid of the Dark. If Nickelodeon would have released the movie that they wanted it would have been toned down for little kids. This was not the first time that Nickelodeon attempted of releasing a scary movie for kids. I mean, remember when they tried to do Crybaby Lane?
Oh, yeah, and I remember that it got banned after its first airing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. This movie was supposed to be released in theaters because it cost a lot of money to make. Then, eventually, it was demoted to being a TV movie. It was aired only once. The parents were so shocked of how scary it was that it didn't air for over a decade until somebody on Reddit found a VHS copy of the movie of its only airing. And then it just started spreading around like this underground cult classic. It kind of generated these weird creepypastas. But then eventually when the movie was released on the 90s or all that, it's pretty stupid, actually. I mean, I know that a lot of people, they like Crybaby Lane for what it is, but I hate that movie because I mean, it tries to be like Are You Afraid of the Dark, but in a way in which the characters are unlikable and the scares are just not as impressive. But yeah, I wouldn't have been surprised if they would have probably gone in that direction, in which they wanted to lighten this up for little kids. They wanted to make it like Abbott and Costello or like Goosebumps. So if Nickelodeon would have released Are You Afraid of the Dark the way they wanted it, I think it would have been a train wreck. But if they would have released the movie that DJ McHale wanted, maybe it would have generated an audience, but I don't think it would have generated that much of an audience, because, as I said before, people were getting into Goosebumps. It was during the revival era of Are You Afraid of the Dark, not the original run. And also, it would have been too scary for kids, so maybe it would have not gained as much of a following as, say, like, other classic movies with kids in it. So, I don't know. I'm very mixed about this. So, do you have anything to say right before we go?
I would actually say that I think that I would actually be interested in maybe Nickelodeon trying to make the series now for a modern audience. I think it's time, and I think it would actually probably work better now. But having said that, look at Goosebumps.
It's kind of funny because I remember over 3 years ago, I mentioned Are You Afraid of the Dark as one of the shows that I would love to see come back remade, and I think it is time for a revival on Are You Afraid of the Dark, but unfortunately, with Goosebumps, the way how it turned out, I don't think we're going to be getting that anytime soon. I mean, with the popularity of shows like The Walking Dead or Game of Thrones, I think that Are You Afraid of the Dark will have to push itself a little bit more in order to generate those kind of kids, because the kids of today are not the same kids of 25 years ago.
Yeah, I think that tastes have pretty much changed, and kids haven't really had some sort of exposure. But in ways, I actually do think that kids have actually been introduced to the 90s Nick shows thanks to the Splat. And some, even in the 90s Nick community, have been introduced to those shows thanks to the reruns, with some claiming they're 90s kids, even though they discovered it through reruns on the 90s and all that in the Splat.
If we can get revivals on Netflix, then I wouldn't be surprised if maybe we can be able to get revivals on Nickelodeon shows. I mean, they've done it for Hey Arnold, and they've done it for Legends of the Hidden Temple. Who knows what they'll do? So maybe we'll just see what happens. Alright, so that's it for this episode. Tune in next time, as we're going to discuss about another Nicktoon that would have had a theatrical movie, but was canceled because of unknown reasons. But it does have very, very interesting casting choices. So we'll see you next time.
So what?